Muy bien. Buenos días. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening. I don't know who is listening to me. Please switch off your micros so as to avoid background noise. And welcome all of you to this debate, a virtual debate, but also a real one. My warmest welcome to our viewers, especially to our distinguished panelists, Andrés Ortega from the Elcano Royal Institute, Lorena Boix from the European Commission, Matthias Bauer from the European Center for International Political Economy in Brussels, and Lucia Velasco from the State Secretary for Digitalisation and Artificial Intelligence. The topic you are going to discuss, European digital sovereignty, might have started as a catchphrase. Sovereignty is, as we know, a deeply loaded and charged word since Jean Baudin published Le Six Livres de la République back in 1576. A concept that has indeed marked international relations for several centuries and indeed continues to do so. The concept of digital sovereignty is now being promoted from various areas of the European Union, some of its member states and some firms too, in an attempt to regain control over some technologies that we know are now dominated by US and Chinese companies. It also answers to the idea the European Union as a regulatory superpower with global reach in some areas. However, in our interdependent world, it cannot mean independence as usual and even less protectionism. Probably autonomy would have been a more suited word in accordance with the strategic autonomy proclaimed in the European Global Strategy. Europe is not an island, as we know. On the contrary, it's one of the more interconnected regions of the world. Thus, sovereignty has to be necessarily a very, very relative concept. On a paper published by the German think tank, Wissenschaften Politics, a few months ago, a strategic autonomy is defined precisely as the ability to set one's own priorities and make one's own decisions in matters of foreign policy and security, together with the institutional, political, and material wherewithal to carry this through in cooperation with third parties or, if need be, alone. Thus, a strong strategic autonomy means being able to set, modify, and enforce international rules as opposed to unwillingly obeying rules set by others. It means simply, in digital terms, that Europe, as said by Angela Merkel a few months ago, should and want to control its own destiny, be it to defend its own interests or to defend also our values. Of course, the opposite of strategic autonomy is being a rule taker subject to strategic decisions made by others. The European Union, we know, wants to be an actor in this complex new world, not a playing field, not a theater, or even just a market for other countries, even more so in an increasingly bipolar setting between the US and China. Indeed, a Hobbesian world where our major asset is precisely a normative power, a normative one, a Kantian power. To translate desire into reality, good intentions, we know, are not enough. It is not enough to talk if this desire is not accompanied by corresponding investments, both public and private, in all these areas. Can the pandemic and its economic effects be a step forward, or on the contrary, a step backward in this respect? The idea is not just regulation or investment, it must be both, with some dimensions that are lacking in the debate. We have now probably an opportunity. They say that you should never underestimate the chances opened by a good crisis. So this is a very, very important and relevant topic you are going to address today. My best wishes. Thanks again for your interest. And now pass the floor to Andrés Ortega to continue with the meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. Andrés.
Thank you, Chairman. And thanks to our panelists and to all our viewers. European digital sovereignty, what a complex expression. It precedes the present pandemic, but it has gained strength with it and the realization of the importance that digitalization has taken for Europeans and others to fight against COVID to keep citizens in touch in times of lockdown, and to keep a large part of the economy going. It is closely linked to the idea of Europe strategic sovereignty in general, or at least autonomy, which doesn't reject interdependence, but wants to keep the control of its future in Europe's hands. For European policymakers, some at least, the idea of digital sovereignty is part of the larger struggle that they face to maintain the capacity to act and to protect their citizens and livelihoods in a world of increasing geopolitical and geotechnological competition. To control its own destiny in an increasingly bipolar setting of the US versus China, Europe aims to be an actor rather than a battleground or just a market for third parties. The idea of European digital sovereignty is being developed in contrast to some states, mainly, but not only, the US and China, and some big corporations. But today, cooperation with US firms is both necessary and unavoidable. Cooperation with China similarly, albeit less so. And Europeans want to see a greater degree of equilibrium and reciprocity on the EU-China front, also in tech. European digital sovereignty is an ideal to aim at, although it will never be reached, nor should it be reached. Beware of our dreams coming true. It'll be necessarily relative rather than absolute. It is more a process of bargaining in an increasingly hybrid, globally networked context of digitalization, for which neither reliance on unregulated private actors mediating for states have any real lesson to bring. There is also no unanimity in these regards between EU and member states, although much more between institutions such as the Commission and the European Parliament. European digital sovereignty can be understood in four main dimensions. First, hardware and digital services. Second, data ownership and control. Third, standards and regulation settings. And fourth, fiscal regulations. But to talk the talk, the Europeans have to walk the walk. If European countries, including Spain, which lags behind in R&D spending, want to compete with the United States and China in this strategic field, if they want to progress in this sovereignty, they need to increase investment and they need to deepen the digital or technological single market for which they may need the present big corporate players. While the impact of the coronavirus is going to force changes in these strategies that the Commission has unveiled before in the month of February and then in March, the Commission had initially earmarked an annual budget of 20 million euros, for example, for European artificial intelligence. Only, I should add. EU spending in tech is poised to grow with the Recovery and Resilience Funds, from which the Commission wants to dedicate 20% to digital, as it could generate a multiplier effect. Europe thinks it's a regulatory superpower, or at least a supreme rule maker. The GDPR is the best example, some of its competition policies too. Now we are on the verge of a new regulatory spree with the Digital Service Act and other initiatives geared towards big tech. We also have to think that cooperation between the US and Europe and China is necessary in the field of a standard setting, for instance, in artificial intelligence, with two caveats. The first is that we need a multi-stakeholder governance for that, not just states, but also companies and other actors. The second is that maybe complete uniformity is not needed, the key concept being interoperability. But, as it's often said, referees don't win matches, or at least they shouldn't. The EU has a market, the largest in terms of export and import in the world, but incomplete, and it cannot be really digitally sovereign without digitally industrial buses, as I was saying before. As for the fiscal autonomy, the situation of digital tax avoidance, not evasion, seems to be unsustainable. The idea of a digital tax is gaining momentum in Europe, especially with the need to finance the crisis and the new recovery fund, although it is far from unanimity in the EU and even at the OECD, where the technical work has been done. Three other issues to end this introduction to the debate. One is that digital sovereignty has also to do with the defense of values, again, in particular privacy, against the surveillance state, China, for instance, and the surveillance capitalism, represented by the US, to put it in oversimplistic terms. It is part of the political governance system and of the sense of democracy. The second is that if the Europeans who are pushing this idea want to be successful, they have to avoid generating new steps in protectionism. That would not be tolerated by some in the EU. The debate on the control of supply chain and other issues should not lead to more protectionism. Finally, European sovereignty does not diminish national sovereignty. It is based on the idea of shared sovereignty that increases sovereignty for all participants. To talk about all this, we have three distinguished and very notable panelists. First, Lorena Boix, who is Acting Director for Policy, Strategy and Outreach and Head of Unit for Policy Implementation and Planning at DG Connect European Commission, and will bring the vision from there. Secondly, Matthias Bauer, who has written extensively and sharply about these issues, and is Senior Economist at the European Center for International Political Economy, ESIPE, and will bring a think tank's approach. And Lucia Velasco, who is the Head of Cabinet of the Spanish Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence, and will give her view from Spain. Let me remind the viewers that they can ask questions through email, actividades@realcano.org, actividades@realcano.org, and by Twitter under the hashtag EU Digital Sovereignty. Lorena, you have the floor, or rather the screen.
Thank you very much, Andres. Thank you, Chairman, for this introduction. And thank you very much for the invitation. A pleasure to be sharing the panel with Matthias and with Lucia, with whom I have the pleasure to work closely from time to time on our digital matters. I like very much your introduction of both because it facilitates my task, because you clarify many of the concepts that I was planning to share. Let me, as you were trying to do as well, go a little bit backwards and see how all this debate about digital sovereignty started, what it means from our point of view, and what indeed are the tools we have to try to achieve this objective. Is it only money? How to spend this money? Do we need to have also regulation? All this started, as far as this mandate of the Commission is concerned, when our, at the time, President-elect von der Leyen, in her political guidelines, she mentioned the word technological sovereignty. It appeared there. And of course, it immediately created reactions for the reasons you mentioned. Sovereignty is a word that has certain connotations, in particular in the international area. But it's interesting because the way she put it in her guidelines was very much in a context at the time before COVID, which was very much related to competitiveness, to leadership. Then came COVID. And of course, this debate came again much stronger. But also with an additional connotation, which is not only about competitiveness, but is also about resilience. I think that we all realized during the COVID crisis, the importance of digital and the importance of connectivity. And the drama, I mean, it was a drama, COVID, it is a drama, but imagine without connectivity, imagine with all the technologies we are using today to trace, to monitor the evolution of the virus, to find a cure, to remain connected, to be cyber secure. if all these fail, imagine in terms of resilience. So there is a new connotation that brings also some more strength to this debate. But let me also try to clarify, also, as you were mentioning, Andres, this concept of sovereignty. I mean, we've tried, and sometimes now we are using also the concept of open strategic autonomy, which is to show that it's not about being completely and full closing the doors in Europe. This is why we use the word open and autonomy instead of sovereignty. But I must say that at the end of the day, this is just a matter of terminology. I think that what we all have in mind is what you mentioned, is to have the freedom of choice, is to be able to choose, in this particular case, about our technologies and the values behind these technologies. So this means diversifying sources of supply, not being fully dependent in our supply chains. And also something important, I think, at least in the field of technologies, we are talking about key strategic technologies. This doesn't mean that now for everything which is digital, we are going to try to become very autonomous. We need to be very careful on being fully dependent on third countries when we are talking about key strategic fields. And we've been doing a screening. And of course, there are certain issues that are extremely important. Starting with, for example, microprocessors. I mean, these little things that are everywhere in digital. We need to be very careful on those. Cloud computing, of course, connectivity. So I think that this is also something that we need to insist. Now, how do we get there? What are the tools? I think that when we talk about strategic autonomy or technological sovereignty, we need to look at two angles. First is the internal angle, and second is the external angle. The internal angle is about building capacities, about building our technological capacities. And the external angle is about how are we going to interact with third countries if we want to be or to gain a high degree of autonomy. As far as internal aspect is concerned, we have both, I think, the tools of investment and the tool of regulation, and both are really linked. We need money, and we need a lot of money. And this money cannot, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because that would be the ideal, only come from the private sector. We are talking about quantities that are really huge. I think there are studies that say that in Europe we would need 125 billion per year. So it's obvious that this cannot come only from private sector. It cannot come either only from one member state. I think that we need to insist on the need to join forces. It's a big challenge, economic, technological and social challenge, and bringing forces together, financing big projects. For example, in these areas I was mentioning, microelectronics, cloud connectivity is very important. As you know, the European Union has come with a number of funding possibilities. The Recovery and Resilience Fund, where now the Council has agreed that 20% of it should go dedicated to digital. So this is an acknowledgement of the importance of financing here. But we have also, of course, the Horizon Europe program for research and the Digital Europe program, very important for the deployment of technologies. But money is not enough. You mentioned, Andres, the importance of our values, and I think we need to be proud of them, in particular because the concept of strategic autonomy in the digital field is extremely important, because this is not only about the impact that controlling our future has on the economy. It's about the impact it has also on society, about the impact it has on democracy, about the impact it has on the security of our continent. So digital has become so important for every single aspect of our lives that being a leader, I think every country has understood that has connotations everywhere. So the importance of regulating and following our own model is important, but I think that regulation is not only about values. Regulation is very important about how are we going to spend this money? What are the rules of the game? And here, if you see the current debate between the Council and Parliament, is about what conditions do we want to put to the use of this money. So this is very important, but also regulation comes very often as a way to facilitate investment. Let me give you some examples. When the COVID crisis came, the Commission came with a proposal for investment, and in parallel with a proposal of our regulatory program that had to be adapted. We had to come with an advancement of the regulatory approach we wanted on data, because we had realized during the crisis that there was complete legal uncertainty about how to pull data, and we will not advance in key digital technologies if we are not able to do such a thing. So this is providing legal certainty to foster investment. The same for connectivity. We had to come very quickly with a recommendation on how to reduce costs for investment in broadband. So regulation is also about fostering and facilitating investment. Now, very quickly, the external aspect, you mentioned it, also extremely important in the context of strategic autonomy. And here you have also two angles. You have a positive agenda, which is let's join forces with like-minded countries. We will need to review and assess who are our partners, because we cannot do this alone, and we cannot depend only on one partner. So we need to look at this positive agenda, but we also need to look at our defensive agenda. And this is where we are all saying, let's stop being naive. Let's not be protectionist, but let's be sure that we are all working on a level playing field. And this it means using a good trade defense instruments to check our subsidized acquisition, about how investment of certain countries are taking place, and about what are the rules of the game out there. So I'm going to stop here because I think I went beyond my 10 minutes. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Lorena. Really, it's a huge challenge. And as you mentioned, there is the challenge is also building capacity and choosing the right strategic technologies. No? I retain your idea of the positive agenda, and let's join forces, because we're going to need. Matthias, it's your turn. The screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Andres, for the invitation to this seminar and for the kind introduction. Also, thanks to Lorena for this intervention. I very much like Lorena's point about creating a regulatory level playing field that fosters and facilitates investment, providing legal certainty for investors. At the same time, in this rather broad coverage of themes related to technology sovereignty and digital sovereignty, Lorena mentioned a few points that we often hear in the debate from politicians in the member states, but also EU commissioners. And that's, for example, expressions in terms like, we need to improve our capacities, we need to gain a high degree of autonomy, we need to control our future, we need to follow our own model. And I think this is a misguided perspective and a misguided mindset behind the notion of sovereignty, irrespective of whether we talk about industrial autonomy or sovereignty, or sovereignty in the realm of technologies and digital businesses, because it creates an impression that I think doesn't hold true. It's the impression that there is a consensus about all of these objectives across the entire EU membership. And that said, we hear a lot these days about European sovereignty for industries, European autonomy in the realm of technological developments. Emmanuel Macron, Angela Merkel, and EU commissioners talk about creating strategic autonomy for the entire EU economy. And they also claim that the EU's digital dependence should not be countered by a policy, should be countered by a policy for technology sovereignty. And all that happens at the same time as the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his government push for America First policies in international economic diplomacy, vis-a-vis China, but also vis-a-vis other jurisdictions like the EU. And all this happens at a time in which the Chinese government is also taking a larger stake in China's economy, handing out privileges to domestic firms, while at the same time making it more difficult for foreign companies, including EU companies, to gain market access in China. And how does this actually translate in EU policy making? Lorena just mentioned a few initiatives. About a year ago, the new Commission President Ursula von der Leyen formally mandated the new EU commissioners to support the EU's technological sovereignty by the use of economic, trade, and also industrial policies. And when we read the communiques that were published in the beginning of this year, most of these initiatives are legitimized on the basis of what's often referred to as European values. And there are basically three major narratives behind the emergence of technology sovereignty as a desirable political ambition in the EU. One of these narratives is based on the assumption that Europe is somehow different from other parts in the world, particularly with regard to fundamental values and market regulations. I would say that's not true. There are concerns about privacy, data protection, safety of data pretty much everywhere in the world. And I think the same is true for competition policies. People, irrespective of whether they work for governmental institutions or whether they act in their capacity as consumers, they don't like market concentration and the abuse of market dominant positions. A second strand of the debate reflects what I would call political fears regarding the future capacity of Europe's industry, notably multinational corporations, large companies, which are to a large extent headquartered in France and also in Germany. And it's about the capacity to compete on world markets in the future. Germany's economic minister, Peter Altmaier, recently called for a European Airbus for artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if this is going to, if such a company which operates on government funding and political fiat would actually improve the commercialization, but also the innovation performance within EU member states. And the third narrative is based on the claim that the EU as a whole needs to have the policy instruments to control the outcomes of the digital economy and how citizens and companies use digital services. The EU's latest digital strategy communications actually institutionalized numerous versions of technological or digital sovereignty, but the precise meaning still remains ambiguous, including the precise meaning for sectors like data services, cloud services, data management services. At the same time, several legal instruments, suggestions for policy initiatives outlined in the communications reflect a renewed appetite for what I would call isolationist laws in process in some European capitals. And my perception is that some EU lawmakers, but also national lawmakers, like the idea to render the EU a bit more Chinese, transforming member states to economies that are home to myriads of new interventions, which are often arbitrary and also discriminatory with regard to the activities provided by foreign suppliers. So from what I see so far, almost all policy conceptions for technology sovereignty would lead to more government intervention in the EU member states and not less. And as concerns the EU, I fear that this debate, and this is an important remark from my point of view, I fear that this debate will distract public awareness and also political capital away from the areas that deserve much greater political capital and areas that would be much more effective in supporting innovation and economic opportunities in the EU. And at the forefront is the European single market, which is in most sectors of the economy simply non-existent. So take EU services regulations as an example, or horizontal regulations like EU member states' labor market laws or tax policies. And if you compare the EU to China and also the US, you realize that the single market of the US and China is much more complete, allowing companies to upscale and become internationally competitive. And this distraction of political capital away from the challenges of the single market towards what I would call command and control regulations should cause policymakers to ask a few fundamental questions. And these questions are basically, under what conditions could US companies actually become so successful? Under what conditions could Chinese companies become so successful? Does the EU want to become more Chinese? Or do individual member states want to become more Chinese? And how would European strategic autonomy actually impact on the balance of powers within the EU? Tax sovereignty is mainly promoted by the government of France and the government of Germany. So how would this impact of the balance of powers, particularly from the perspective of small and open economies, like Nordic countries, Baltic countries, Central and Eastern European countries? And these questions are particularly important against the background of the fundamental values stipulated in the EU treaties, also the treaties preceding the Lisbon Treaty, for economic policy making, as well as the overarching goal towards, to work towards an open and competitive social market economy in the EU. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I think you put your finger on some issues. The first one is a lack of consensus, I think, among EU members on this idea. No? The second one would be whether what do we have to do to make a single market in digital terms exist, which it doesn't exist. No? And the third one is, I think, this issue whether we want to be successful as US or more Chinese. I think that in Europe, we always tend to look for a third way. But I'm sure that Lucia Velasco will tell us about this Spanish third way. Lucia?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's my real pleasure to be here sharing this panel and reflecting on such a relevant topic. Much of the discussion points, I'm sure they have been already made. However, I would like to give a bit of context because I think it's important not to focus so much on the terminology, but on the whole context and on what we are talking about. I'm sure I discover nothing if I say that we are living extraordinary times. In just a few months' time, the COVID-19 crisis has brought about years of change in the way companies in all sectors, including governments, operate. Digital adoption has taken a quantum leap at all levels, and according to a McKinsey recent study, organizations have accelerated their digitization by 3 to 4 years, and the share of digital products has accelerated by a shocking 7 years. So to stay competitive in this new economic environment requires new strategies. We will all agree on technology's strategic importance as a critical component for businesses, for the economy and society at large. And countries are no different. At the same time that organizations are accelerating their digital transformation, governments and policymakers are having the debates they were planning to have in the years to come. It's time to design the future, prioritizing what we have learned to be crucial, which is autonomy and prosperity. COVID-19 has revealed the critical importance of technology. This has been said over and over for economic and health resilience, making Europe's digital transformation a question of existential importance. It is not a nice to have, it's a need to be. And as President von der Leyen said, this is Europe's digital decade. There's no question. The pandemic has also made it clear that Europe is over-dependent on supplies, both in technology and health, from China and from other countries, something that in Spain we have experienced firsthand. We have also seemed to realize that there are no big tech companies in our countries, which is not a great asset if you're trying to compete in a digital economy. And we rely on all sort of platforms in a time where the union is under attack, because this is something that we don't need to that we need to have it into consideration all the time. Populism is chasing our common project, trying to bring it down and doubting all the time the purpose of the European institutions. Misinformation is weakening our democracies, and well-identified foreign powers are trying to destabilize our electoral processes and our economies with these major platforms as tools. Many citizens are questioning the EU and losing trust, and trust is a very difficult asset to have and to build upon. So at the same time that this is happening, we assist uncomfortable, and it has already been mentioned, to a rising US-China tension and to a world that's increasingly challenging and hostile. We all can agree again that the post-war world architecture is faltering, and that we have United States going all alone in the name of America first and whatever it takes, and China is systematically trying to use the frailties of the declining multilateralism to its advantage. So what happens that we are forced to choose between two options, the aggressive, market-oriented and data extractive American way, and the state-led surveillance ecosystem developed by China. And that is not what we want, because in the middle is little, and there's little. And just to give you some numbers, the European Union holds 10% of the global microprocessors. The largest European cloud services provider accounts for less than 1% on the revenues generated in this market. We have no platforms to compete with Facebook, although we have twice as many users than the US. Moreover, we have less than 4% of the market capitalization of the world's 70 largest platforms. And Apple alone is valued more than the entire DAX index of the Germany's leading 30 companies. So all of the above are just incentives for Europe to develop its own capabilities, which in the 21st century are mainly technological. It's a very logical conversation to have. And it's also understandable that it's time to offer a renewed and updated project, because we have learned a lot of things through this pandemic. And that seems to be the outcome of the agreement that the European leaders had when they decided to face this crisis by financing the reconstruction with the Next Generation Fund that Lorena has mentioned. And without doubt, this is the opportunity that we were looking for. So what has been happening, in my opinion, up until now, the member states didn't have a very clear position on tech issues. Probably the profile of the politicians also helps, but or at least from my impression, it has never been a shared understanding of the strategic importance of digital technologies such as broadband or AI. When it comes to digital, I mean, we have been good at diagnosing and understanding what was happening, but slow at responding, because we were trying to not be probably somebody that bothers or alters anything, but just, you know, be in a comfortable middle position. And we know that there's market fragmentation. We know that there are lack of digital skills. There's gaps in innovation, slowness to adopt digitalization, scale-up funding problems for startups, competition problems. We are not able to compete with, of course, the Chinese, but we don't have power over the market, dominating online platforms acting as gatekeepers. And we see how the oligopolistic access to valuable user data is done by a few companies. So summarizing, due to a lot of elements, we have gradually lost control over data, over capacity of innovation, and over the ability to shape, even to enforce legislation in the digital environment. And it's time to face it unreservedly. We do not have to have any complex to, as a union and as a member of states, to talk about the things we want to talk. Europe must now lay the foundation of its sovereignty. And it's not, of course, a question of isolation. That's a very confrontational, it's a very easy confrontational argument. You want to be isolated. Well, that is not true, because that would go against our interests and our values and our culture. It's a question on making choices that will be decisive for the future of the citizens that live in Europe. And we need, of course, to start by developing European technologies and alternatives, without which we cannot be autonomy or starving, because we, in the end, as it has been already said, we need to be able to choose freely. And this is something that we have also seen during the pandemic with the contact tracing apps. And you can see that you can use technology in many ways to control population, to surveil, to track, or to alert, respecting privacy by design. Well, we want to be on that side, on the privacy by design, of that sort of digital, of the use of technology. So our digital future relies on three elements. It has already been said as well: data, technology, understanding by technology, AI, quantum, 5G, cloud, cybersecurity, and infrastructure, connectivity, supercomputers. So therefore, we will need to rely on four pillars. It's three, but I would add the values pillar as one of them, because I think it's fundamental. But we need to control our data, we need computing power, and we need to secure connectivity. Lorena already mentioned the importance of processors, clouds, and to provide all citizens with connectivity. But we also want to have a digital revolution where nobody is left behind, and where technology does not need to be adopted at all costs. And in Spain, we share this view, and we understand the importance of working together at the European level towards a European future. It cannot be other way. The digital horizon is not something to be faced individually. We also need to do our homework as a country, because it's a combined effort, and this is what we are doing. I will briefly share with you what we have been doing. At the end of July, we presented our national strategy called Digital Spain 2025 to launch economic growth, reducing inequality, increasing productivity, and harnessing all the opportunities offered by these new technologies while respecting European values. And this agenda should foster the country's digital transformation by guaranteeing digital connectivity, digital skills. We need to thrive in the new economy, and increase cybersecurity capabilities. Of course, the digitalization of the public administration and of companies, with a special focus on SMEs. We are convinced that we need to develop the data economy and artificial intelligence. And at the same time, we want to guarantee digital rights for the citizens. This is also a declaration of intentions. We want to be the epicenter of the digital rights and the digital humanism. And almost 2 months later, this past week, the president of the government presented the Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Spanish plan, which will guide the implementation of those 72 billion euros between the next 3 years. And it precisely makes a focus on the investments that the European Union is also guiding us towards. Contemplating even a more ambitious 33% on digitalization, because we think with this recovery plan, we are building today the foundations of tomorrow's autonomy, the one that we want to share with the European Union. We believe in establishing a set of rules, infrastructures, and technologies that will make a powerful, fair, and free Europe. And we must now lead the way on digital, or we will have to follow the way of others. And I will end it here.
Thank you very much, Lucia. I retain that we need new strategy and we need to update our project to the new situation, which in a way is accelerating the projects that we had, but also building new ones. No? Matthias mentioned before this German idea of AI, artificial intelligence, Airbus. No? Airbus is a success story, except for this moment of crisis, but and for Spain it has gone very well. But my question would be that whether you think that with this idea of strategic digital autonomy, how will smaller EU members take as much advantage, or will they take more disadvantage than larger members? No? How do we secure that there is a level playing field among Europeans, not with Europeans with other countries or other companies, but among Europeans? No? Who wants to?
I'm happy to deal with that. But of course, Andres, you will allow me to react to some of the comments of Matthias as well. I understand it's his role to give some punch to the debate by sometimes even characterizing some of the position of the Commission. So I really need to react to some of those. Thank you very much, Matthias, for giving me the opportunity. There is one that, of course, is very close to my heart, which is the single market. Because saying that all this discussion is to distract the attention from the single market is probably the opposite to the reality, because strategic autonomy is impossible to achieve without the single market. So the single market is a very important part of it, because where are we going to get not only the increase of supply, the internal increase of supply, but also the internal increase of demand? It can only come from the internal market. So this is an essential element. I mean, if I don't mention it, is that for us, it's kind of our DNA. I mean, that's what we do in the Commission. We build the internal market, we help it. So part of the regulatory agenda is precisely to eliminate barriers, to be able to build on this strategic autonomy, to be able to build capacities. When I was mentioning the data governance legislative act that is coming in a few weeks or days, I honestly don't remember the date now, is to bring barriers down so that companies can cooperate and share data on with the public sector. So basically, this is integrated in the concept, I would say. As regards this, I would say, and I agree here with what Lucia said, I think that we don't need to be shy about the fact that we have our own values. I think we should be very proud, in fact. And where, of course, we need to pay attention is that it doesn't look like, okay, here comes now the European Union and they want to impose their values in the world because we are the best. I think this is certainly not the way we work. I think that we are firm believers in the European Union of multilateralism. And that's the way we bring our values to the debate at international level. And I must say, we are very proud that it's working. And it's not working because we are the best, even if I think we are very good. I think it's working because we are very often the front runners in regulatory matters. And so people are good at all the things. We are good regulators. And very often we come the first. We came the first on privacy. With the artificial intelligence principles, we are not yet at legislative level, but we were the first, and we brought them to the OECD. And what resulted in the OECD is very similar to the principles that were pushed by the high-level group on artificial intelligence, and then they were adopted by the G20. That's the way we work in Europe. We bring this debate to the international level. And of course, if we influence the debate, then we are very happy about it. Because honestly, if I have to make a choice between how it is done in China and in the US, I like the way we do it. Of course, we are very close to some of our like-minded partners. We are very close, and this is a good thing. And we need to work on that. And now I'm coming to answer your question, Andres, which is very related to one of the comments that Matthias made about, is this simply an agenda of France and Germany? I think this is a very good question. And of course, my answer is immediately, of course not. And this is precisely why we are doing this at the European level. There is a lot of consensus of what is being done, because precisely thanks to COVID, this debate has reached the European Council level. And as you know, the European Council level works on a consensus basis. And the fact that the recovery package has a certain tone and certain guidelines, well, this was agreed by all the member states. The fact that 20% has to go to digital and where to go in digital is something that has been accepted by every single member state now. There were a lot of debates, and this is how we work in Europe. We debate everything, and sometimes we disagree, but the beauty of it is that we end up with an agreement, which is normally a balanced agreement. Now, do we want an Airbus for artificial intelligence, or do we want an Airbus for cloud, which is the Gaia X project that is now very much of fashion? What I think we need is, as I was saying before, to join forces on certain key big projects where we don't do it just because we want the Airbus to be the best of the universe. We do it because there is no other choice, because the amount of the investment is so huge that is absolutely impossible. If we talk about supercomputing, we are talking about billions for a machine. No single member state can afford that alone. And the fact of doing it together is precisely what is going to guarantee, if we do it at EU level, that every member state is going to benefit from it. Because if there is EU money being put there, then it's a rule that it has to be accessible by every member state. That's the beauty of bringing joint high impact projects. And I can give you examples of how this has worked in the past. Lucia was mentioning microprocessors. There was a time where we were very strong. Then there was a time where in Europe, our market share was strongly decreasing. Right now, it's the US, it's South Korea, it's Japan, and a little bit of China on it. We created what we call a joint undertaking, where member states joined forces. The European Union put money and created then what we call an important project of common European interest. I can assure you the results are there. The market share in the European Union has immediately increased, and it's increasing. We are still at 10, we will get more. For supercomputing, the same. We were in the past in the top 5. We are only now in the top 10. We have created a joint undertaking to bring together member states and industry. We are buying computers, and immediately our position has come up. And the beauty is that every member state and every company can make use of this joint project. So that's, for me, of course, you cannot do that for everything. It's only when it's necessary, when there's a failure that you need to feel. Voila, so I will I will end my intervention here. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthias, do you have something to say to that?
Oh yeah, there are many voices popping up in my mind now. Just a brief remark on, I mean, I will answer your question in a minute, but just a brief remark on this year's, what I would consider claim that the EU is somehow under attack. I think that's certainly not true. And I also disagree with the perception that US companies are in a way market-oriented and aggressive. I would say they are market-oriented, but they are certainly not more aggressive than EU companies or EU business people, respectively. Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical with all of these suggestions and the emphasis on this collectivist mindset that we need to act, we need to create A, B, and C. I think that the organization men in Brussels or in European capital can do little to improve the performance of commerce and innovation in the EU, and acting on what I would consider a militarist philosophy promoting large units on European champions and bureaucracy would also not help to overcome the EU's digital innovation gap. And Lorena just mentioned that the EU was in the past a regulatory frontrunner. I think that's certainly true for a few policy areas, including data privacy, of course. I would disagree with the claim that the EU stands for regulatory excellence. If the EU were a good example for regulatory excellence, I think we would not be here to talk about the EU's innovation gap and the EU's digital gap. And also, when we look at the single market under the Juncker Commission, it actually deteriorated. It created more and more layers of regulations on top of EU regulations for businesses, which do not help businesses, particularly SMEs, to trade cross borders. And then there is this debate about the digital services tax, where the European Commission's tax department faked data to promote a campaign and support a campaign that argues that digital companies are in a way undertaxed, which is not true. If you look into companies in France, in Germany, but also in Spain, you realize that there are many companies that actually pay much less tax on their corporate profits than the largest digital corporations. And besides that, I don't understand how the EU's overall objective to become a leader in digitalization and artificial intelligence matches with the call for digital services taxes, where you tax large companies that are formally required to pay the tax, but this tax is actually borne by those who use the digital services, and that's mainly SMEs who put their product and services on Amazon's interface or who buy advertisement space on Google and Facebook. So as concerns the definition of tax sovereignty, but also calls for new subsidies to create European champions, I would advise policymakers to take the perspective of individuals first, and first think about policies that support sovereignty and at an individual level. And such a perspective does not rule out, and I think that's important, don't misunderstand me here, such a perspective putting in the center stage individual sovereignty, it does not rule out privacy laws, and it does not rule out competition policies designed to combat business conduct that is harmful to consumers. But it rules out policies intended to preserve what is often stated as fundamental values. I would put more emphasis on fundamental human rights, but not European values, because there are so many people outside the EU who also share European values, and the other way around. And putting individual sovereignty at center stage would also stand in opposition to subsidies. subsidies to artificially create inferior supply, funneling money to a few who are politically well connected at the expense of the largest number of Europeans. Take a look at Caro, for example, the French search engine, heavily subsidized, but actually failed French search engine development project. And to sum up, any industrial and technology policy that is favored by the EU's two largest countries can have a disproportionately negative effect on Europe's smaller, open economies. Those companies and citizens could be deprived from the best technologies that are available on world markets, new economic opportunities from the adoption of these technologies, from the adoption of digital business models, and partnerships on global markets, existing partnerships in the future, undermining these economies' development process, the process of economic convergence within the single market, and of course, international competitiveness. And any EU-imposed technology protectionism along the lines suggested by some policymakers in some large member states would leave, from my point of view, would leave the entire EU worse off. And it would disproportionately hurt countries in the EU's northern, eastern, and southern hemisphere more than large countries whose economies are already much more diverse and are also home to a large number of politically well-connected large corporations.
Thank you. Lucia, you want to add something?
No, I will just say that if you don't think that the European Union is under attack with this contentious and worry language, then I don't know what it is. I don't think that there's nothing left there. No, of course, I mean, we do not agree on our views and trying to antagonize and to make us look as a union like the bad guy, commanding and controlling, executing, corrupted, only trying to benefit the politically well connected are topics that I cannot discuss on because it's just not the nature of how things are being done. And I think that there's been an intense debate and a lot of work at all country levels and at the European level to try to come up with solutions to the problems that we are seeing and to improve the mechanisms that we have and to allow companies to grow in this environment, which I don't think that they don't only because of regulation, but on the contrary, it is because they have issues accessing to finance, and then they usually brought by another country. And I think that this is just one example on how we need to focus on some areas that will help us to thrive in this new economy. I understand that we can do it and that we have to have a positive approach to problem solving and not tearing down the institutions, because we are it's a responsibility to keep a democratic environment where the institutions are solid and that guarantee that things are done the way it should be done.
Thank you. I will take now some of the questions that the listeners are putting to us. One is the issue of Biden-Trump. In terms of big tech and our European relations with big tech. And after the report by the House of Representatives on that, do you think it will make much difference whether, in this field, no, not in others, whether Trump is reelected or Biden, or there is a Biden administration? Who wants to answer that?
I'm happy to take it, and also to because of course I don't bother even to reply to any accusation of faking data, because I think that doesn't deserve it, even a comment. I think that just before going to the Biden Trump, I think that to have a good debate is good to have done the homework. So obviously to pretend that there is a digital gap in Europe because of the EU regulation is basically not having done the homework. I think there are multiple studies on why there is in certain aspects of the technology a digital gap, plenty of them. So I think that there are so many reasons: underinvestment, fragmentation of investment, and if at all regulation comes into play, is precisely fragmentation of regulation. So the only thing the EU is doing is precisely to harmonize, to create a single market. So basically the opposite to what is pretended. But now into the Biden-Trump, of course, here I can only talk on my personal capacity. I mean, the Commission is not certainly going to say what is going to look with one or the other. So really talking on my personal capacity, something which is very clear is that the US now is having a position which is very much vis-a-vis China in technology matters. And it's normal. It's China is rising in this field, and technology geopolitically is extremely important, as I was saying in my intervention at the beginning. So this situation of where China is in technology with respect to where the US is not going to change whomever wins the election. So the fact that the US will need to position itself vis-a-vis China will be there. I think that where there might be a difference is in the way it is done. And maybe, and again, talking on my personal capacity, maybe Biden will be more engaging at multilateral level than is the case for Trump, which of course will always be a good thing. So that's what I think. It's probably more in the way things happen rather than on. Of course, I think that whatever administration will certainly give a high priority to technology, because there is no other way.
Thank you. Anyone wants to jump on this?
Yeah, maybe a brief comment. Yeah, I mean, just one comment on Lorena, what Lorena said on regulation and the EU's digital gap. All of these developments that we saw in the EU since the formal adoption of the single market in the beginning of the 1990s, with hindsight, reminds me of the divide between East and West Germany. So the people in the East and the West were more or less the same, also in terms of their engineering capacities. And then the regulatory divide after the Second World War basically caused the two countries and their economies to diverge tremendously. Now, I would argue that there's not so much a difference between people's engineering capacities in the US and China, but the regulatory landscape is much more different. It's much more fragmented in the EU. Lorena rightfully pointed to that degree of fragmentation, but the EU did not manage on the basis of its current institutional setup to overcome this high degree of regulatory fragmentation in certain industries and also horizontal policy areas. And that, referring to what Lucia said with regard to the post-war global economic order, that leaves me with the question, shouldn't we actually think about a different institutional setup for economic cooperation within the EU 27, one that was, for example, also tabled by the Juncker's White Paper on the Future EU in 2017. So basically that if there are a few countries willing to move ahead with certain policies, for example, the harmonization of taxation, VAT, corporate taxation, go ahead. And if others want to join at a later stage, they should be free to do so. If you would have this, let's say, EU economic policy making a la carte, I think we would see much better outcomes in terms of commerce and innovation in those countries that dare to do more in terms of harmonization. As concerns the EU election, the US elections, it's difficult to say where policies are heading to with regards to the regulation of technology companies. I mean, we are talking about many different themes here: competition concerns, concerns over the collection and use of data, but also concerns about harmful or illegal content. And I can see some consensus between the two parties, but it depends at the end of the day on how you approach all of these challenges in terms of precise regulatory measures.
Thank you very much. I have a last question, because we don't have much time left, for Lorena from Sara Criado. She says, you said that we are good regulators. Then how is it possible that digital is a success in Europe, but only in the demand side? This has to do with what you were saying before. Why don't we have local supplies or local supply? Where are the European Apple, Facebook, Alibaba? Are you aware that this conference is broadcasted by YouTube and not by European platform?
Thank you, Sarah, for this question. First of all, I think that we need to, and this is something my commissioner is very good at, that to stop being feeling really like the bad, we are so bad at digital. I think that it is true that the US are mastering and are really the leaders in the platform business, basically, which is the business of dealing with private data, with personal data. Yeah, they came there very strongly, but I don't think this means that Europe is not good at anything in the digital field. I think that just look at connectivity, 4G, 5G. I mean, we are very good at that. Telecom equipment. I mean, we are very good at many things. We are very good at robotics. We are quite pioneer in AI research. So I think that we should stop, you know, being timid in how good we are. I think also, and this is something that my commissioner is very keen at, the fact that we have somehow lost the battle of dealing with personal data and the business around it doesn't mean that there's not much still to gain. I mean, we all know that the full digital economy is going to be around data. There's something we are extremely, extremely strong at in Europe, which is industrial and public data. And this is going to be the next big game. We are really good at that. And this is where we are now putting our baskets in, our DX in the basket to say, now we have this new challenge. Let's make sure we don't lose this train of you know, making business on that front. And this is why we are coming with these proposals, in particular on the cloud side, on creating data spaces to facilitate the use by industry, including SMEs on this. So now we are good at demand, not at supply. I think that's in fact what I was trying to explain before. We are good at some supply, and what we are trying to do now with all this debate we are having precisely is to foster both supply and demand by joining forces. And again, I would repeat what I was saying before. This implies joining forces as regards the level of investment, but it implies a good regulatory environment. And I think this is probably where the three of us are going to agree here. It's about good regulation. It's about good regulation. And we are doing as much as we can. As you know, the Commission comes with proposals. The member states agree or disagree. The Parliament adapts. But I think that's what we are trying to do in this mandate. That's what our Commissioner Breton is really trying to bring. Let's come with a good regulatory environment, like the Data Governance Act, like the Digital Services Act, that what it brings is a better environment to create. But Sarah, I think it's not only about supply, I think demand is very important. It's extremely important as well. And again, and I that would allow me to close in something I think we all also agree, the three of us, which is the single market. That's how we are going to create both supply and demand, which is badly needed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all your interventions. I think this is an issue which is going on and that maybe is more focused on the future than on the present. And the question will be how to build a single market in the future and how to choose the winners, not the winners, not the industry winners. I mean, the technologies that are going to be strategic and important. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again soon, rather than later. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Andres. Thank you.
Goodbye to all.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias.
Thank you.